everybody. Um, Welcome again to the November 8th meeting of the High Level Radioactive Advisory Council. So first, I think we should extend an invitation or a welcoming to our two new appointees to the advisory board, Jana Hanisch. Jana, and she's was appointed the governor's county government representative, and Jana is the Montreal County engineer. And I don't know if you guys recall or people recall that she sat in on our last November's meeting and was appointed in January. So secondly, we have Murnak Petrovic as the governor's representative through the agricultural community, and she was appointed in February. So thank you to both of you. Both of them did have a chance to attend the Midwest Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee here on October 8th, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes. So Ed, maybe we should then start with that being said, we should do roll call, okay?
Okay, and I've gone through Chairman Roars, you're here, Senator Pat, and I didn't see Representative Ruby. Has he come on?
No.
Oh, yes, there he
Yes,
goes.
he's
Yeah,
here.
he's on. Okay.
Daniel. Yep.
Yeah, I see him. And then Merrick, I see he's on. Did Ken come on? I don't see him.
He declined the meeting.
Oh, he did. Okay, thank you. Jana's here. Andrea saw Dr. Neeser, or Dr. Wiebe. Ron is here. Jeb Williams. Jeb come in. I didn't see him. Oh, and Josh. I don't see Josh. And then Dave. I see Dave Glott. So we've got, actually we have 10 right now.
Yeah. So we have a quorum.
Yep.
All right. Okay, next order of business is, you all received a copy of the November 22nd meetings and the agenda. So with that being said, could I entertain a motion for acceptance?
So moved.
So moved by Dale, seconded by?
I'll second.
Second by John. So, all right, with that being said, the motion carries as all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed,
Aye.
nay. Opposed, nay. Okay. All right, that motion is approved. Ed, do you want to do a little background on the council duties before we hear from our first speaker, please?
Yeah, I just wanted to, get this. We did mention this last time, but going forward, if somebody's going through the minutes, to make sure they're aware that we have to report to both the legislative management and to the Industrial Commission every 2 years on what we've been doing. And so 2 years ago, which to me seems like a year ago, but 2 years ago, I presented to the EDTC committee, and I realized that it had been 2 years, and so I scrambled, got a hold of Chris Joseph, and thank God for Chris, because he went back, looked at the law, and said, "Well, I didn't have to be present. I just needed to submit a report to them, but I needed to get it to them by 5 o'clock that day." So I got it to their attorney, Gunderson, and they were able to get it. He was able to get it in the minutes, and then I'm presenting to the Industrial Commission at the because I'm doing my quarterly report, so I'll incorporate that into that report on November 26th. So I'm certainly an example of how quickly that can sneak up on you. I would have swore that was only a year ago that I was in front of that legislative interim committee, but it's been 2 years. So as I say, I just wanted to make a quick note. So going forward, somebody won't do the same thing that I was almost guilty of. So that's all I had.
Okay. Guilty or not, you're still the man. So, well, good. Next, then we'll go to our featured speaker for today, and it's Miriam Junket. I hope I've said that right. She is an intergovernmental and external engagement advisor nuclear material storage and transportation. She serves on the Pacific Northwest National Council, and she has a bachelor's degree in chemistry and a master's degree in environmental science. And her title today that she's going to talk to us about is DOE's Package Performance Demonstration. So we'll have some times for questions, but I guess what we would also ask our board members to do is turn your cameras off and your microphones off because of bandwidth conservation. So if we could do that quickly. And Mira, thank you for being here, and please go ahead with your presentation. Okay.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect. Absolutely perfect.
Wonderful. Thank you. And I really appreciate the invitation to be here. I also want to introduce the DOE Department of Energy team lead, Jay Thomas, who's on the line, and he will probably open with a couple of opening remarks, and then I'll go forward with the presentation.
Yes, good morning. Can everybody hear me okay?
Sure. Well, great.
All right, excellent. Thank you, Miriam. Okay, good morning. And again, thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. My name is Jay Thomas. I am the team lead with the Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy, and more specifically, the Office of Storage and Transportation. Just want to talk about the mission. So the mission of the Office of Storage and Transportation is to prepare to design a license, construct, and operate one or more federal consolidated interim storage facilities for spent nuclear fuel, sited through a consent-based siting process, and provide for safe, secure transport, and conduct research and development to address spent nuclear fuel and high-level waste storage and transportation operation needs now and in the future. Now, one of our priorities is this package performance demonstration project, where DOE plans to conduct physical demonstrations on a full-size spent nuclear fuel transportation cask. It is intended to strengthen relationships between DOE and states, tribes, and other federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, industry, and other stakeholders, creating a shareable confidence among involved parties. And of course, to provide further details on this package performance demonstration project, I'll now go ahead and turn it over to Miriam. Thanks.
Thanks, Jay. So with that context, let me go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see it okay. Please let me know if you can't see those slides.
We got them.
Looking good? Okay, perfect. Great. Sometimes things are a little bit easier with show and tell. So we'll have some visuals here for you. So as Jay mentioned, we're here to talk about the Spent Nuclear Fuel Package Performance Demonstration. And we're going to give you a little bit of information on what this project is and what we're doing right now. And we first were invited to do this because of the Midwestern Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee presentation that we gave. So we're trying to get this information out to as many groups as possible. We do have a disclaimer here that we're not here to talk about the standard contract. I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV, so we won't be talking about those things today. But what we do want to talk about is what is spent nuclear fuel. So let me make sure that this is advancing the slides. There we go. Okay, so what is spent nuclear fuel? I know that your advisory committee deals with a number of different kinds of radioactive materials. So I want to be clear about what kind of material we're talking about. And spent nuclear fuel is the fuel that comes out of a nuclear reactor when it's no longer able to effectively produce power. So the first picture that you see of looks like a long rod. Those are what the spent fuel rods look like. And when those come out of a reactor, they're moved into a pool where they cool for a while and the radioactivity is reduced, the heat is reduced, and eventually it can be moved out of the pool into dry storage casks. So that's the picture on the bottom right. And dry storage casks can either be in a vertical configuration or a horizontal configuration, but they're stored on site at nuclear power plants or at licensed independent storage facilities for indefinite periods of time. Essentially, they're licensed for 20 years at a time, but they can be relicensed, and it's currently all over the country. So right now, what the DOE is trying to do, as DOE shared, is develop a consent-based storage facility where the spent nuclear fuel could go. So when it is able to be transported to such a facility, it would have to move, obviously, off of the site where it is to a destination site. And to do that, they use spent nuclear fuel transportation casks. So the picture on the lower right and the cutaway image just above it shows you what these look like. But these are casks that are certified by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So the NRC is the entity that's responsible for licensing these special containers that would transport this fuel. The Department of Energy would be the entity responsible for moving it. All of that is done under a well-established regulatory framework by the Department of Transportation, the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and the Department of Energy. So there's layers of safety and security requirements, certification requirements, all of which ensure that this is done in a safe way. I mentioned that the NRC licenses these containers. For a container to be licensed, it has to go through a number of tests. It has to be able to be shown to withstand a series of hypothetical accident conditions. However, the casks are not necessarily tested at full scale. Physical testing can be accomplished on subscale models, or it can be certified through physical testing, computer analyses, or a combination of all those things. So there haven't really been full-scale tests on any of the licensed models. This is not terribly unusual in engineering practice. If you think about, for example, building skyscrapers or building bridges, we use a lot of engineering modeling in everyday life to get things up to full scale. We don't build mock-up skyscrapers at full scale. There's models that are built, there's computer models, and then a full construction would take place. And that's similar to how these casks are. But what DOE is considering right now is full-scale package performance demonstration. So in other words, understanding that these have not been tested at full scale, there have been some concerns raised by members of the public and by stakeholder entities that would like to see these tested at full scale or demonstrated at full scale to show in real-life terms that these can, in fact, withstand these conditions. It's been a long time since these kinds of tests were done. Right now, you're seeing on the screen a picture of a demonstration that was done over in the United Kingdom. They called it Operation Smash Hit, which is a really cool name for a project. Over on the right, you can see that there was a cask dropped at a facility in Germany, and those are some real full-size tests that were previously done. And here's another couple of examples of what has been done on those full-size casks. So in the 1970s, Sandia National Lab did a series. Those are the pictures that you're seeing on the right of the screen. And again, the UK did their project in the 80s. Germany's drop test was done in the early 2000s. So it's been at least 20 years since these were tested at full scale. And none of the scale tests that were done were on the current fleet of casks that would be used. So DOE is moving forward, in addition to understanding the public concerns, with these endorsements by some really important independent parties. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had moved forward with trying to do a package performance study in the early 2000s. In 2006, the National Academy of Sciences published a report called Going the Distance, and it recommended full-scale package testing. In 2012, the Blue Ribbon Commission on America's Nuclear Future recommended full-scale testing. And finally, the Western Interstate Energy Board recommended full-scale testing in 2018 in a policy paper. And the Western Interstate Energy Board is a corollary state regional group similar to the Midwest group at which we presented this a couple weeks ago. So again, why is DOE planning this performance demonstration? Well, first of all, DOE is very interested in building public trust and confidence in the safety of spent nuclear fuel transportation casks and spent nuclear fuel transportation. So you guys are obviously familiar with the concerns that come up about radiological materials, and moving those materials is also something that is of public concern. So DOE wants to spend the time and effort building public trust and confidence and helping people understand this better, ask the questions, and feel confident that this is safe and secure. In addition, these are very large tests, so they present a unique opportunity to gather new technical data that can further support the computer models used in the certification process, in the development process, and in showing that these are supported moving forward. Third, we want to make sure that we record high-resolution video to use not only in DOE communications products, but also to help answer questions from our stakeholders. So, for example, states and tribes have their own responsibilities as radiological materials are being moved. They get questions from their first responder communities, from the public, and having these kinds of videos that can show what it is that these casks can withstand can be a really powerful communication tool. And finally, and this is something Jay touched on in his opening remarks, DOE wants to explore opportunities to strengthen relationships with states and tribes. This entire project is not being done because there's a technical gap or some sort of licensing need. This is truly being done to answer the mail in terms of the concerns that have been expressed by not just members of the public, but states and tribes and other stakeholder groups. So when we talk about what kinds of demonstrations DOE is considering, there's really two buckets of plans that we're considering, types of demonstrations that we could do. The first set of those kinds of demonstrations are based on the NRC's requirements that are codified in the Title 10 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 71. That's regulatory speak for the specific requirements that those casks have to go through to be shown to be able to be certified. So on the right of the screen, you can see an image that shows that a cask would have to be dropped from 30 feet onto an essentially unyielding surface. And that's not a concept a lot of people are familiar with, but what that means is that it's an incredibly solid surface so that virtually all of the energy from a drop would be reflected back up into that cask instead of the ground absorbing the energy. So it's very damaging to that cask. After being dropped, it then goes to a second drop test onto a puncture bar. That's a 1 meter onto a 15 centimeter bar. Third, it gets burned. It gets a thermal test, exposure to a fully engulfing fire, 800 degrees Celsius for 30 minutes. And then finally, after those three things, it gets immersed underwater. And all of that has to ensure that the cask maintains its integrity. There's two other immersion tests that are also in the 10 CFR Part 71 tests. Those are not done in sequence, but they are additional tests. So that's the regulatory test that DOE is considering doing to one of these casks. The second kind is what you could consider a realistic or a scenario demonstration. So as the pictures show, this might look something like having a train run into a cask or running a cask into a wall to mock up what it might look like if a train ran into a bridge abutment or something like that. There are transportation accidents out there and people are very concerned because of what we have all seen on the news with some of the terrible things that have happened, for example, in East Palestine, the ship that ran into the bridge in the Baltimore Harbor. These are things that are very visceral to people. And so we understand the need to also not just do perhaps laboratory type tests like the ones in the previous slide, but something that looks like a realistic type of scenario that people can imagine. In addition, DOE is considering the option of doing retrieval demonstrations. So once all of these abuses are done to the cask, eventually you got to pick that cask back up, put it on the rail car, and get it to its eventual destination. So we would want to perhaps spend some time doing retrieval demonstrations showing how a recovery would go after some sort of an incident, and that throughout all of that, the integrity of the package is maintained. So in order to do this, it's really important that DOE understand what it is that people are concerned about. I've said a number of times that we've heard from the public, we've heard from different stakeholder parties, but we're asking again for input so that we can more specifically design these demonstrations in a way that will answer the mail. What will make a difference to people? So DOE is seeking information about what a potential demonstration should look like. Should it be the regulatory test? Should it be the scenario demonstration? Should it include retrieval? We're also asking questions about what kinds of transportation casks should be used for this. There are a limited number of licensed casks in the United States, so DOE intends to use one of those, but it's very unlikely because these are expensive casks that all of them could be demonstrated. So we're asking questions about how to make that decision about what casks to use. One of the most important things about any kind of demonstration is having a place to do it. These are large tests. These are very large packages. They can weigh over 400,000 pounds. So having a facility that's able to handle a cask and be able to measure it, drop it, burn it, whatever we're going to do to this thing, we have to have this sites and facilities that are able to do those kinds of large scale tests. Furthermore, we're asking questions about potential analytical tools. We want to make sure that we have the right instrumentation on it. How do we measure the impacts to the cask? We want to make sure that we have the right videography. We want to make sure that we're capturing all the information about it that we need to. And all of this, of course, depends on continued funding. We need to be able to pay for this. We need to be able to buy a cask. We need to be able to procure the facilities, the instrumentation, and all of that is subject to congressionally appropriated funding. So in order for this to move forward, we need for that program funding to move forward. So one of the most important processes is not even just designing the demonstration itself and conducting that in a scientifically important, scientifically robust way. That is absolutely important. But our external engagement on this is just as important. And that's one of the reasons why we're very happy for the opportunity to be able to talk to you today, answer any questions that you might have, because we understand that we can't do this alone. This is something that affects all of the stakeholders that might be on transportation routes. And so we're asking for that input into what demonstrations to perform, what other parameters we need to consider. We're also asking questions about how the results should be used and distributed, because at the end of the day, we're going to do these demonstrations and we're going to have these results, but it matters now what we plan to do with that data so that we collect the right data, so that we get the right videos. We want to make sure that our stakeholders, DOE stakeholders, give us the information about how they intend to use this information so that we can make sure we get them the tools that they need. We also want to make sure that we're identifying potential success paths and pitfalls. In any big project, there's ways to go right and there's ways to go wrong. And so we're asking questions about what it is that we could do better and what it is that might make this fail. And we want to know those things. It's an open and honest conversation right now. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. And it's really helpful to get feedback from parties that will eventually be receiving spent nuclear fuel or having it along their transportation routes. In the longer term, because these are very long-term projects, so it's going to take years to develop a centralized interim storage facility. It's going to take years to consent-based site a facility. We have time on our side to be able to improve the knowledge base about these things. Radiological materials are not something that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's something that comes with a fear factor. And so we want to help people understand more about the safety and security measures that are in place so that we can create that shareable confidence. And shareable confidence, when we say that, what we mean is if we can help our first responder communities, mayors, local leaders, we can help them understand what it is that is and is not of concern as spent nuclear fuel is being transported, they can share that confidence with their communities so that they're able to stand up and confidently say, yeah, I've seen one of these casks go through all kinds of horrible things and it was fine. And so we don't have to worry about the derailments that you see on TV. We don't have to worry about this thing going through our town. We want to make sure that we're providing the tools and the knowledge base to help with that. And finally, when we do get to a transportation campaign, we want to make sure that everybody already knows everybody else. We don't want people trading business cards as the train is coming through. We want to build those phone trees now. We want to facilitate the communication by building relationships. So I mentioned that we're seeking all this information. It's easy to say, harder to do in practice, but one of the formal mechanisms that the department has to be able to gather information is through a request for information. That's what RFI stands for. We asked 5 different categories of questions in our RFI. Category A was a lot of stakeholder input and feedback. So that was the questions about what kind of demonstrations would be meaningful. What could we do right? What could we do wrong? What are you interested in seeing? What's most important to you? Category B, C, and D were market research for the vendors. So I mentioned that we needed the cask, we needed the facilities, we needed the instrumentation. So those questions and those categories were targeted towards the vendors that would potentially provide those goods and services to be able to conduct the demonstration. Category E is the shelf on the garage where we nothing quite fit anywhere else. We had some questions about independent review, for example, and different kinds of benefits that might come from a package performance demonstration that weren't captured in the other categories. So all in all, we put this RFI out July 31st, and the RFI response period was open until October 31st. We received about 50 responses to the RFI from interested parties, from vendors, from various organizations, and we're sorting through that information now. And what we're doing with that information is sorting it into the categories. So the questions, as I mentioned, included a lot of different topics. So we're sorting those into different categories, and we're going to then move toward providing a publicly available summary report that describes what the department heard. And then from what people are interested in and what facilities are available, we'll develop an options and recommendations report that will essentially say, okay, this is what people want to see, and these are the facilities that are available, and here's how those things fit together. And from that, we can develop the demonstration protocols, which is somewhat similar to if you ever took a science class in school and that you get your procedures and your materials. That's what the demonstration protocols would look like. And then we'll be putting out performance work statements and requests for proposals to procure the goods and services to actually conduct the demonstrations. It's really important for me to note, though, that this RFI was a formal mechanism that we were able to gather a lot of information, but we're not stopping gathering information. And so one of the opportunities that we had was you could write in. We are currently looking to have a second opportunity through a Federal Register notice to collect a little bit more of the stakeholder information. The RFI was a very structured document targeted with a lot of market research, and we heard back from stakeholders that it may have been a little bit more complicated than the lay public wanted to respond to. So we're putting out a second opportunity, hopefully soon. If that doesn't wind up going through, I'll have to retract that statement, but we're on track to get that out soon so that we can gather a little bit more information from the public. And I'll be happy to share a link to that once it becomes available. But even so, with the RFI closed, we are still accepting information from different groups. So right now, we're looking at a phased engagement approach. And I just realized I have not been looking at the screen to see if there are any raised hands. So if you do have a question, please be sure to pipe in because
I'm watching for you.
Thank
Okay.
you. I appreciate it. Appreciate it. So our phased engagement approach, just to quickly mention this for the sake of timeline, to develop the RFI, we did a lot of initial engagement where we went through primary technical considerations. We developed our information portal, so we have a website that I'll share with you, and we got that information together to make the RFI, and then we moved into phase 2, which is where we are now. That is that we got the RFI out, we're gathering the responses, we're increasing our outreach and continuing to gather feedback. We've done a couple of webinars, we'll do some more of those, we're doing listening sessions, we're coming to groups like this one to get your feedback and to continue to gather information about what people are interested in. And eventually we'll move to those RFPs, and that will be in the about next year, we think. So this is the final slide here is to say how you can stay up to date on our package performance demonstration. We have an email list that you can sign up for updates. We have an information portal. I'll drop that link in the chat too, or you can scan this QR code that's on your screen. And our information portal will tell you all the things that we have going on or new opportunities to send us information. Once we do get that Federal Register notice published, we'll have that a link to that so that you can respond to that. Or if you're interested in responding to the RFI, even though it closed on October 31st, we would still welcome your feedback. There's no reason why we can't continue to accept feedback. We'll be working on this for several years and we want that feedback. It's really important to us. So we hope that you'll continue to stay up to date with us. And with that, I will take any questions that you might have.
So members, please turn your cameras and mics back on again, please. And then does anybody have questions right now for Miriam?
Mr. Chairman, this is John. Ms. Gosser, I have a question, and this might sound like a dumb question because of the, but as we look at the communication link between the agencies and states and communities, that was one of the reasons why this legislation came to be in the first place. And I'm curious, when as we stand today, when spent nuclear fuel is transported, what is the procedure for communicating with the states that the process, the product is going through, and the communities that are being impacted potentially with that transportation?
I think that was a question for me, right?
Yes,
Yes, it is.
yes, it
Okay,
was.
just wanted to make sure.
Miriam.
So There's a number of different mechanisms that are in place. Some of them are formal, some of them are informal. Right now, the Department of Energy has a really incredible communication forum through the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, the NTSF. And this NTSF is a mechanism through which DOE communicates with states and tribes about transport of radiological materials. And that applies not just to high-level waste, but also spent nuclear fuel, low-level waste, things that are going towards the waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico that exists. The NTSF has within it state regional groups and a Tribal Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee, or TRIMTEC. And those groups meet regularly with the DOE to share information. So these are that phone tree that I mentioned that's already in place. These are groups like the Midwest group that you were able to visit a few weeks ago. We've got those relationships in place where we communicate regularly. There are also formal notifications that happen. So when spent nuclear fuel is transported, there would be specific notifications to states and tribes along the routes that are requirements. And DOE wants to have those relationships, those notifications already in place, and make sure that people are informed. It's a little bit of a complicated situation in some ways because while the siting of a facility will be a consent-based process, transportation routes are chosen based on a number of requirements for safety and security, and they're chosen by the railroads. They're not chosen by DOE, but they're chosen with a number of regulations in place. So there's certain aspects of it that involve a number of different parties, and communication among those parties are really important. But those are some of the mechanisms that are in place to ensure that. I also want to make sure to ask Jay if he has anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, very good, Miriam. I will add just one little thing. So the minimum, I would say, trigger that is going to kick off the communications is you do have NRC regulations and DOE orders that require for shipments like this, pre-planning be done with the states, tribes, and communities. Now those are pretty minimum, and it is pretty well understood by the industry and by Department of Energy that in today's environment, the requirements say you need to get pre-planning with the states so many months ahead of time. We realize that that's not enough time. So we will be reaching out as early as possible once we've identified that we will have a transport. And we do have the committees and the with the and agreements with the local state regional groups, as Miriam indicated, to enhance that communication.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, and
Continue.
Presenters, do the states that you work with, is there state legislation that deal in the area of transportation as far as the communication of transports or any other aspects of the transport, or is that a federal requirement and states basically just follow along?
Jay, I might
Miriam?
ask you to answer that question. I'm making sure that I understand your question correctly. Are you asking essentially who has the responsibility to make the rules for the transportation? Is that more or less the question?
Well, yes, but I'm wondering if states, if there is legislation in certain states that have precedence over the transport of spent nuclear fuel, is it a federal requirement? We'd like to know
Yes.
if there's modifications in our state that we could consider.
Understood. So there are federal regulations that apply across the board. There are also state-specific things. So different states have different security requirements, for example, such as where inspections might take place, different fee structures for different types of transport. But there are federal requirements, and then there are also state requirements. And Jay,
So,
please add to that if there's anything.
If I could just add, I think Representative Nelson is getting at is this committee has been more focused on storage than transportation. Now that you're here to talk about transportation, is there something we should know that we could implement at the state level that we haven't thought of yet, though, right? Is that right, Representative Nelson? I mean, I think that's the last 2 or 3 years we've been working on storage, and that would be one of my questions when you get done answering this question is, have we talked about the storage aspect, or is that outside the parameters of what you're charged to do?
So the question about whether or not North Dakota should be considering things, I would strongly recommend talking with the other states within the state regional group, because that's a wealth of information in terms of what other states have and what has worked well for them and what has not worked well for them. That's one of the strengths of having the NTSF and the state regional groups, is being able to share information like that. And I know that DOE is also in communication with states quite regularly, and I'll defer to Jay on anything else that you might want to add on that point. With respect to storage, this project, this package performance demonstration project, is about transportation. However, there are a number of projects going on at DOE and the Office of Nuclear Energy that have to do with storage. So if there are other questions that you have that you would want to talk to or have a presentation on storage aspects, I'm sure that we could get people in front of you to be able to answer your questions on that as well.
And I think Ed and the next chairman should probably put that on the list of things to do, because that's really what this committee has spent most of its time dealing with. And so appreciate your questions on that. Maybe if I could ask a question, and what I think about when I see something like this is the local people, the local responders, and their ability or knowledge base, or having the technical equipment to deal with something like this is absolutely off the radar, right? I mean, we had an incident out here in Castleton where many years ago, not so many years ago, maybe 8-10 years ago, a tank or a trail derailment happened, a tank blew up, and a small community was expected to fight something they had never been exposed to. When you talk about 400-ton casts, there's nobody in the upper Midwest that's got the equipment to deal with that. So how do you prepare for that? Is there a response team going to accompany this transport activity? Or you're saying yes? Please
Yes.
expand on that, because it would take a heck of a response team. And then while you're answering that, the other part is it necessary that it goes by rail, or would it be better done on interstate system?
These
If
are
you could
excellent
answer.
questions. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness of what you're asking, because we are aware that there are rural communities that do not have equipment at the ready. And that's one of the things that there's a couple aspects of answers to that question. The first one is no first responder community will be alone. There is a group that there's different programs in place. There's different groups that are response teams that would be able to be in response quickly. Essentially, Department of Energy teams. There's I forget
Okay.
all the acronyms of all the teams, but
Sure.
Jay can probably help me with that. But one of the other aspects of this is that when DOE moves forward with a transportation campaign, there are specific funding mechanisms in place to help ensure emergency preparedness along routes. The Nuclear Waste Policy Act in particular has what's called Section 180C, and that is it's fairly generically stated, but DOE has put forward policy statements about how funds would be distributed to affected parties along transportation routes to help with emergency preparedness. So there's multiple things that would happen in advance. And one of the reasons why the advance notifications take place is to help with that, so that all of that information, all of that emergency preparedness is ready to go. So the equipment concerns and things like that, completely understandable. And that's one of the things that we're aware of, and that we would want to be working with states and tribes along routes to ensure that everybody was prepared, everybody has what they need, they know what numbers to call so the response teams can come. In addition, the train itself, the cask would sit on a rail car, and DOE has specially designed a rail car called the Atlas rail car. And there's systems on that car that are specifically designed to help avoid any kind of incident. So these systems have more sensors, more immediate capability to get the data from what is happening with the train in real time and avoid accidents. So there's that part of it. And the train is going to be escorted by a rail escort vehicle, which is essentially a security component on the train. So it would be accompanied at all times. So there's multiple layers of preparation in place, notifications, emergency response that would occur ahead of time. Jay, I'm sure I've left something out. There's layers and layers of this, but please add or correct anything I've said.
Yeah, no, as usual, you've done a very, very good job of answering the question. Yeah, as part of, again, going back to the pre-planning that is expected for when preparing for a spent fuel shipment, one of the things is recovery, is considered as recovery. And so once you have identified the route that the spent fuel transport is going to take, one of the things that would be checked is, okay, yeah, we do understand that the weight and the dimensions of these are unique. And so one of the things we would do is we would actually, as part of a contingency procedures, is identify companies along the route that have the capacity and the equipment to help with the recovery. And those are identified way in advance. They're part of a plan and done, again, well in advance of the transport.
Good, good. All right, other questions? It seems like there's only legislators asking questions. Is there others out there that have questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to thank Miriam for building on what Erica Bickford talked to us about 2 years ago. When at that point she was the acting director of the Office of Integrated Waste Management at DOE, and then also Natalia Sareva, if I said that correctly. So
you did.
And they estimated at that time 2 years ago that this probably would be happening 10 to 15 years down the road. Is that timeline is still correct?
I believe so. And part of what's important to note is that with a consent-based process, we can estimate timelines, but DOE is moving at what they like to call the speed of trust, essentially. There will not be a facility built until there is willing consent. And so there's a timeline that we can provide, but it's going to depend on a lot of the factors that are community-based, essentially. But yes, I think that is still a fair timeline for what DOE has in the horizon.
The other thing, I was curious I mean, these obviously will be reused and going back and forth, but has anyone estimated what the life, like one of these casks, would it last for 50 years or 5 years, or it would just wear out from usage?
That is a question I am going to ask Jay to answer. He is a transportation cask expert.
Yes. So yeah, the casks are designed, licensed according to the regulations at that time. And so as long as regulations don't change in the future that affect that cask's ability to meet those regulations, then they can continue to be used and relicensed. And I think the licenses or the CFCs from the NRC are good for normally about 5 years, and then they're renewed. And so, yes, you could have a cask that has been in service for 35, 40 years, providing that it has been maintained according to its safety analysis report and that it continues to be able to function per the certificate. Again, there's been old packages back in the 70s and 80s that incorporated features that are no longer acceptable to the NRC, and those subsequently, when they come up for renewal, either are not requested to be renewed or they are denied because they don't meet the new regulations. So I can personally tell you that before I came to DOE, I worked for Arano, and I was the manager of a package we have called the TNRAM, and the TNRAM has been in service since 1990, and we continue to use it to this day, and it's still a very effective package.
Oh, thank you. And I just mentioned that I know Dave Glott, that his department gets notified when there's hazardous waste being moved, and I assume the same for Ron with DOT. And so this would probably be similar, that the states, there'd be a notification system when material's coming through.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct. The regulations require for certain materials layers of notifications, and most of those go to the governor's designee for either Part 73, NRC Part 73, or Part 37, which is low-level race shipments and highway rate route control quantities.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other
Senator
questions?
Patton has a question.
Yes.
I wanted to, and maybe I missed it, but I go back to the testing, and on these casks, is that pattern of testing, is that in sequence on the same cask? In other words, the drop, the
Yes.
puncture, the fire, immersion. So it's the same cask going through that sequence?
It sure
Okay.
is.
Okay.
Yes. And that's that's per regulatory requirements.
Great. Any other questions? I don't see any hands up yet. Please jump in if you have a question. All right. Seeing no more questions, thank you, Miriam. Thank you for your time, and Jay. And I think we'll move to the next agenda item. And that would be Senator Patton from District 26. And Senator Patton's he chairs the Energy and Natural Resource Committee and is a member of the Energy Department Transportation Committee, and as well as many other assignments. Dale is going to bring us up to speed right now with the Energy Department Transportation Committee's new regulations. So Dale, would you please take it from here?
Thank you, Senator Roars. A little bit on our interim energy committee, when we met up at the Dakota gasification plant, we introduced a draft bill that would authorize, I think it's $500,000 of spending by the state to study both the opportunities and challenges as it relates to developing nuclear energy in the state. We made some minor modifications in the bill and subsequently approved that bill draft, and it will go forward in the next legislative session to be considered for approval. I'm going to go start with some things that are happening in the states. When we look at, I've actually been to the Idaho National Laboratory where they do study nuclear energy. That's part of one of the biggest research facilities in the world for nuclear. And what we're seeing there is a renewed interest at the state level, and I'm going to identify two specifically, Alaska and Wyoming, to develop their nuclear energy resources. They've come up, and I've got a couple of people online here that are probably way better and knowledgeable about this. So if I get out of line, please correct me after I'm done. But Alaska, because of the remoteness of a lot of their villages and so forth, they're looking at what's called small modular reactors, SMRs. And we actually, as far as I know, don't have any in the United States right now. There's 3 in the world, but they are looking at developing these small modular reactors. And they, I believe, I've been told, have the ability to use other nuclear waste and further deplete that resource to results in a reduction in the toxicity of the waste. And again, I'm not even a mile wide, but I'm definitely less than an inch deep on my knowledge on this stuff. So you have to bear with me. Wyoming, and I've heard this, is also looking at these small modular reactors and a little bit more. And I've heard that they are considering legislatively a bill that would authorize disposal of nuclear waste in Wyoming. Don't know what the outlook of that is, whether that's a widely accepted thing within their legislature, or if it's just if it's going to die on the vine when it gets to our session or not. But right now, and I think it's been identified previously, that in almost all cases, if you have a nuclear plant, you have to store your waste basically on site, and that's been a challenge in developing new nuclear plants, and all of them have been looking for another option related to that. And probably the biggest, it's called the biggest check mark as far as going through your checklist when you want to look at developing something nuclear. So we got the $500,000 worth of funding from the state, for the state being proposed to take a look at this. And I believe with that, I'm not sure, but I think it goes to EERC, but they would address not only just the storage aspect of it, but transportation as well. So we would have a better picture of what transportation issues would look like. This is long-term stuff. And when we look at that, even initially starting somebody that actually wants to do something is actually probably looking at that 10 to 15 year window that was identified earlier. A few other things that has really come up recently in the last several months is the artificial intelligence and data centers and their huge demand for power has triggered some new relationships. Now, nuclear plants are very reliable. They have a very, very high reliability as far as, they're operating at 95, 96% of the time. Very little downtime. They do have challenges in ramping up and down on their power delivery. I mean, they operate best when it's continuous. And that's what a data center likes. They want to have continuous power running 24 hours a day all the time. And they want to have that high reliability. But as a result, I know that they're bringing back online the reactor number 1 at 3 Mile Island. There's one at Susquehanna, if I got that right. There's another one at Palisades in Michigan, another one in the southeast part of the country. All of them are looking at providing power to data centers. In some cases, they're looking at building the data center on site or adjacent to the nuclear plant and doing direct delivery, basically. There's some challenges with that, but those things are all in the works. So as we go forward, the data centers providing the top biggest market cap companies in the world are all tech companies. They've got a lot of money. And they're looking for, essentially, the positive on the nuclear from their standpoint is carbon free. Another positive is their very, very high reliability of delivering power consistently. So they have a lot of interest in that. And so we're going to see a great deal of, I'm going to say, opportunity for nuclear as it relates to that. The other aspect of it is when you look at North Dakota, we have a very high interest in North Dakota as it relates to AI and data centers because of our weather. The cost savings from a cooling standpoint because of our weather is somewhere between 30 and 50% for these data centers. Now, one of the things that this is me in my mind thinking is as we look at the opportunities with nuclear, we also have to be aware that in order for us to be able to, I'm going to call it, sell it to our communities and to our state, we have to be able to realize the value of it in North Dakota. I think it's going to be a very steep hill to climb to say we're going to build a nuclear plant in North Dakota so we can provide power to Minneapolis. I think that the question is, will that power and that availability of power be a true benefit to the state or to the community where it takes place? And that'll be a determining factor as we deal with reducing the concern and the risk associated with the storage or the transportation, the construction of the plant and the opportunity that relates to that. I think is very important that the state be the one that benefits from that in order to make sure that we are able to realize that opportunity. I think it's a big challenge as we go forward. Almost all things related to energy seem to have big challenges attached to them, along with those tremendous opportunities. So I go back to Jay Thomas and ask him, did I do or say anything completely wrong or only partly wrong?
No, you did a very good job.
You got the endorsement you were looking for, Senator Patton.
Okay.
Anything more, Senator Patton?
No, that's all I've got, unless somebody else has questions.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions for Dale? All right.
Ed, you made me do this, so you got to,
I
backstop
was just
me a
going to say, I don't have a question, but I really appreciate because that's, we found out a lot there, and then I'm sure that Rich will follow up, and then Dave Glott too on everything. There's so many things going on now, with people looking at sources of energy and nuclear certainly being a big part of that.
Yeah.
I did want to jump in though and make sure we're now down to 7.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we do need to
Yeah.
if we could jump ahead in the agenda.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Exactly. Ed, I was going to ask if the committee minded if we just pause move forward with one of the other agenda items here quickly, because I know we've lost a couple members, and I hope we did not lose Representative Nelson. Did we lose him already? Because I think he said 10 o'clock. So are you there, John? Are you still there? Doggone it. If we lost John, do we have a quorum, Ed?
Now we're down to 6, I believe.
Okay, Andrea said she would come back if we needed her for a quorum. I will call her right now.
6, 7. No, I'm counting 7. 2.
Let me ask Andrea to jump back on.
Oh, no, I've got 6 now. So yeah, it is 6.
Hey, Andrea, we need your vote. Can you come back? Thank you. Bye. She's coming right back in. So before she gets here, I know Andrea knows the drill. As most of you know, that I have now chosen not to run for re-election, and my term comes to an end here in a few days, December 1st. And so with that being said, we need to elect a new chairman of this committee. And I've enjoyed doing this for the last gee whiz, I suppose it's been 6, 7 years that I've been chairing this committee. So it is also time for me to move on. And so I would open the nomination right now for chairpersons of the committee. Is there anyone that has a nomination that they'd like to bring forward? Hearing none, I guess I would like to represent Senator Dale Patton, and I think just the previous demonstration of his knowledge would explain to you why I think Dale would be a great candidate for this leadership role, just because he's so involved with energy of all sources. And I think we all are on this committee for the purpose of understanding the value proposition of nuclear, as well as the challenges that come with it. And Dale is absolutely the most knowledgeable people in the Senate or in the legislature on this issue. So I would like very much to nominate Dale for the chairmanship. Do I hear a second?
This is Andrea, second.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. So do we have a second? Is there any other nominations for the chairmanship? All right, hearing none, then I would ask for a vote to support Dale in this mission. And so that all of those that are in favor of Dale being the chairman of this committee, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. Dale, thank you for taking on the role. I know you have many other duties, and I know just adding this to it is not exactly what you were looking for, but I truly believe you're the best suited for this job. And I shared that with you the other day, and thank you for taking the challenge on. So thank you, Andrea, for coming back. Andrea's got to
You bet.
leave.
Thank you.
She's got
I have a
a
Back off.
presentation
Did
to
Andrea
make.
drop off so she wouldn't have to listen to my talk?
Yeah.
She's-
Did you not get that? Like, bye, Dale. Congrats. See you guys.
You got 2 minutes
Bye.
to be on time, Andrea. All right, good. Thank you all. So now let's jump back to Rich Garman. He's the Director of Economic Development and Financial Division of the Department of Commerce. And Rich is going to talk to us about potential future energy needs in the state based on interest that's being expressed by the industry and the high energy needs that we have in the state. So Rich, thank you for being here. And we look forward to your presentation. So please, whenever you're ready. You're on mute. You're on mute. Still on. There you go. Oh, you're back on mute. There you go.
There we go. All right. I'm going to try to share a screen here real quick. Okay. Wow. Talk about bandwidth. Are we screen sharing now?
Not yet.
Tell you what, we're going to, wow.
You had it there for a split second.
I don't know what's going on here, sir. I think you nailed it earlier calling it bandwidth issues. So
Okay, let's drop our cameras here. I'll keep my mic on for the time being.
sorry for this. You know what? I can talk without slides. I don't need
Can you
slides.
hit share and then
Yeah.
pick which screen you want?
Yeah, that's what I was doing. It's not doing that. Tell you what, the slides aren't that important. The story is. Let's go with the story. How about that?
That sounds good.
All right. Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. That's the best part of my job is talking about the amazing things that are happening in North Dakota. I want to talk a little bit about some of the projects that are coming, knocking on the door. And I did have the opportunity to meet with some pretty amazing people and see some pretty amazing things in the last 2 weeks down in Wyoming and Utah. So I'd like to share that little bit of a story with you too. It's regarding nuclear. So I had some great opportunities down there. But first, I'll start on some of the economic development interests in North Dakota. That was the original ask. Senator Patton already nailed it. The very biggest ask in the state right now for power is definitely in the world of data and AI and things of that nature. A little bit about my background is I spent 30 years in the energy industry, the last decade or so of that working in economic development in the energy industry. When I was working in that position, asks of energy of electricity in the area of 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 megawatts was pretty standard. That's what it took to get a project up off the ground. Think of an ethanol plant or something like that. They're sub 50 megawatts for the most part, which were big asks. All of the data projects that we've had knock on the door right now, they start at 200 megawatts and move up from there significantly. So some of the projects that we have right now, like I said, are starting in the 200 megawatts, but that's just their entry level ask. And then their asks quickly move up into the gigawatt range, so thousands of megawatts. Senator Patton also alluded to the fact that if you can name one of the major data companies in the world, they're here. They're searching for sites. They're talking to power producers. They're searching for solutions to serve power to data centers. And again, Senator Patton nailed it again. Some of the biggest reasons they want to be here are reliable energy. Number one, we need more of it, but we have reliable energy. Believe it or not, like you said, the climate is very attractive to them. 30 to 50% of their power will go to climate control in some of the southern states. That's not anywhere near the issue in North Dakota. They also love the business environment up here. They're very impressed with that. So, like I said, if you can name a large data company, it's been here. They've been here and they're actively seeking opportunities for data here. In fact, this week, my team and I spent 2 full days working with another large company, came to the state looking for gigawatt size sites. So they're out there, they're knocking on doors, they're looking everywhere in the state. The first few that came, one of their drivers was they wanted to be as near to larger communities as they could be, but they're quickly finding out that that's not where all of the other assets are. So they're looking everywhere from extreme northwest to extreme southeast and vice versa. So they're looking everywhere in the state. So data right now, if we roughly calculated all of the different asks that we've had, it's in the 20 gigawatt range. So unbelievable, 20,000 megawatts. We don't have that much, obviously. So there has to be other solutions. Take that with a grain of salt and understand, in the world of economic development, not every project comes to fruition. But what if 10% of those come through? That's still 2,000 megawatts or 20, that's bigger than Coal Creek. So it's still a lot of power. So data is the driving force behind the gigawatts. That's where that is. And it's not going to change. It's here. It's here forever. And that's where we're at on data. If anybody has any questions along the way, please just stop me too. One of the other big projects that we have eyeing the state as well, it's not gigawatts, so it almost seems small, but it's not. We have an iron ore processing facility that's trying to locate in the state. They would take product from Minnesota, bring it to North Dakota, and process it. You've probably heard of the project. It's been in the public eye. It's received a little bit of money from Development Fund and a few other sources. I believe it's received some Clean Sustainable Energy Authority money. Scranton Metals is their kind of their mother company. You may know them as North American Iron. That's what they're incorporated in, as North Dakota. Their ask is approximately 300 megawatts, which is a significant amount of power as well. Really am attracted to that project too because of the diversity it brings to the economic landscape in North Dakota. We don't have ore processing facilities in the state, and that would really diversify some of the project mix. Other big projects that are out there. One just happened here not too long ago, but it happened in a way I don't know that anybody was really expecting. There is an extremely large drive right now to build out sustainable aviation fuel projects. The news that hit probably about a month ago was the purchase or the pending purchase of Red Trail by Gevo. Gevo's been around the state for a while looking for opportunities, and they finally got to the point where I don't know if they've closed the deal yet, but they're very close to closing the deal on Red Trail. And long term, what that will be is they will take Red Trail, expand upon it, and take that to sustainable aviation fuel. They'll take the ethanol process, take that product, and expand on and make sustainable aviation fuel. Beyond that particular project, there's at least 3 to 4 other sustainable aviation fuel projects that are looking to come to the state. Traditional projects that are using corn-based feedstock, those are like say about a 75 to 100 million gallon per year projects. Those take in the neighborhood of 50 to 60 megawatts per project. So again, if you add those all up, we're several hundred megawatts again. There's several other value added projects as well. Those aren't as well defined right now, but they'd be along those same 30, 40, 50 megawatt per project power usages. There are several other less well-developed, heavier industrial projects, maybe in the neighborhood of the iron ore processing project, but not as well defined yet. Those are all in the dozens to low hundreds of megawatts. One other area that we really haven't talked about a lot, but is going to be a large impact on power in North Dakota. I think everybody knows it, but we haven't really fleshed it out a lot. Is carbon capture. Carbon capture technology that could be retrofitted onto any of our existing lignite-fired plants will take a reasonably large load to run those facilities. The numbers vary a little bit, but the last time I was reading the numbers, current technology puts that load of those carbon capture technologies at about 30% auxiliary load. I'm sure that'll get refined some, but even if it's 20%, 1,000 megawatts means you're going to need 300 megawatts, 200, 300 megawatts to run that facility, that carbon capture facility. That's not necessarily made the headlines yet, but I think we need to consider that as potential in the future. If we do carbon capture on those facilities, part of that load goes towards the carbon capture. If we step outside of that and go to direct air capture, which is another technology that we've talked about, EERC has studied a few projects like that where you take carbon dioxide directly out of the air. Varying technologies, but that's about a megawatt to 2 megawatts plus or minus per ton of CO2 removed. So I know that's a very vague number, but that takes energy as well. If that's going to become a project, that takes a significant amount of energy. The 2 projects in the state that are actually sequestering CO2 right now are some of the lower energy opportunities because they don't have to clean the CO2 stream anywhere nearly as much as the others. Those are the ethanol SAF plant opportunities, and that's about 100 to 200 kilowatts per ton. not as significant, but still a load that we need to consider when we're talking about total energy requirements for all these projects. Those are the big ones. There are dozens of other projects that take varying loads, but I tried to hit all of the big ones. Before I go on from there, does anybody have any questions on any of those projects or opportunities that I touched on there?
Questions? Anybody got questions? Oh, Rich, you're knocking it out of the park. Keep
I
going.
have a
Well,
question. So, is anything going to change with the new Trump administration as far as this carbon capture and everything, or is this something that's just can't be stopped?
I wish I had that crystal ball. All I can say is that the existing programs, like for carbon capture, what's driving the carbon capture programs, obviously, is the incentives, the $85 per ton or the $180 per ton for direct air capture. Honestly, those are in there for 12 years right now. If you start a project, you're guaranteed a 12-year cash flow. I don't know the details on how that could be revoked with the Trump administration. Could be, but I'm not positive on how that would work out. Maybe Dave knows. Is Dave on? Yeah. Sorry, Dave. Threw you under the bus there. So
Not a problem. I can add a little bit. It's not only the federal government looking at carbon capture, but they're also looking at other controls on power plants,
sure.
like mercury and air toxics, that really make it a tough decisions for the power plants to where do they invest their money, and is there certainty going long term? Those questions still remain. I think there's some hope that during this administration, some of those proposed or regulations that are being fought in court will be rescinded. But I think there's, stay tuned. We just don't know how that's going to go. We have permitted Minn Kota to be carbon capture and sequestration. They do have a permit to move forward, but they have to make some pretty heavy decisions here. Investing under the greenhouse gas plan, they're going to be investing over $2 billion into something that may not be around in 10 years. And so those are all the uncertainties that are still out there.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate the the backstop there. One thing also that North Dakota, I think, might see, this is just Rich thinking out loud here. Carbon dioxide, when we got carbon capture, storage, and use, CC, use and storage. The U part is a part that nobody remembers at the federal level a lot of times. And I think North Dakota would like to see that U part going a lot more. So enhanced oil recovery, let's call it what it is. That's exactly where I think we could utilize a lot of this carbon dioxide we're capturing. So I think that could be a driver in the future as well, to get to the point where North Dakota is using more and more of that carbon dioxide that's captured for a beneficial purpose rather than just storage. And I think that might drive some of the, as long as there's an incentive there, it would drive the production as well, which would hit the oil well sites as well. So that's Rich thinking out loud.
One of the other things, if I could, Rich,
yes, sir,
is some of the markets are pushing the demand for a carbon constrained energy source. So
sure.
You throw that in the mix, and at that point, then it becomes a function of what does it cost. That's why ethanol has some desirability, because it's so much. It's not that nearly as expensive to capture the carbon off ethanol as it is, for example, coal.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. Another note on that as well. We've talked, like I said, we've talked to all of the big players in the data markets. We asked them point blank in the first 10 minutes of our meetings, do you care what color the electrons are that serve your facility? We generally get a longer answer than is necessary, but at the end of the day, most of them come back, not all of them, but most of them come back and say, we'll deal with the sustainability on the backside. We need power, we need it now, and we need a lot of it. Green electrons, brown electrons, black electrons, they don't care what color those electrons are. They're just, they need power, and they're willing to figure out their sustainability issues on the backside and not worry about it on the supply side. Now, they would much rather have completely sustainable power, that solves their equation up front. But they understand that that may not be totally possible. So it doesn't end the conversation for sure.
So, Rich,
Yes, sir.
You talked about data centers and their demand on the marketplace for electrons, but you haven't talked about Bitcoining. Is Bitcoining kind of falling by the wayside, or there was a lot of conversation about that early on, and now we're not hearing so much again? Can you respond to that?
For sure. There is definitely still cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, blockchain, all the same thing, basically. There is still an effort to do that. In fact, two of the bigger centers in the state right now, a couple hundred megawatts of power is being pushed into that right now through Applied Digital, some in Jamestown, some in Ellendale. It's still there. There's still a need, but I think that the end story is that the data centers are far eclipsing the power needs of the data mining, of the crypto mining operations. They're still there, but we haven't had as big a push for those in the last 12 months as we have.
So can you address the affordability or the ability for cryptocurrency and or data or computing, centers? Which one can pay more? That's what it's going to come down to. That's who's going to get the power, the one who pays the most. And do you have any feel for which one of those two is going to survive the 10-year plan?
They both have their place, sir. Data is there. Everybody has to have data. I mean, we're using it today. Anytime you pick your phone up, you're using it. Cryptocurrency is necessary, but it's not nearly as pervasive as data or AI. That's becoming the driving force. So I think that's what's going to drive the story is data and AI, just from sheer size. They're able to, Ellendale, for instance, by the time that facility is finished out, that's going to be a $20 billion investment down there. It's several billion in infrastructure, and then many, many more billions of dollars in computing equipment. Usually your crypto centers aren't nearly that large. The largest crypto center in the state right now is up in Williston, and it's several billion dollars, but it's a far less substantial investment in infrastructure. The buildings aren't nearly as intense on a crypto center as they are on a data center. A data center is an enclosed brick building for the most part. Crypto facilities are not. They're more open buildings, but on purpose. They use that for cooling and things like that. So if I got to take my $100 bill and invest it, I think I put it on data. If that's the question on the table. So
that was kind of what I was wondering, which way it was going to go. So thank you for that. I know we're kind of getting off track here a little bit. Any other questions for Rich? Because this is exciting stuff, but it probably doesn't. Well, eventually it comes back to the generation of power, and nuclear is going to be in that conversation in the future. So any more questions? Rich, I didn't mean to cut you off. Were you done with your presentation?
I had just one more thing. Senator
Sure.
Patton had brought it up as well, so I'll blame him. Talking about the nuclear consortium and Idaho National Labs and stuff. I had the great opportunity to go down to Wyoming and Utah in about 3 weeks ago, and I got to tour the Terra power site, the nuclear power site that's being constructed in southwest Wyoming. Amazing tour. Got to meet with several of the folks from Idaho National Labs, and I spoke on a panel about what our power looks like in North Dakota. And I took the approach completely to talk about we need as much power as we can to do the types of economic development we want to do. But there is a consortium right now between Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, and Alaska, and I believe maybe Louisiana is in there now. And Ms. Juckett had said earlier about partnering up with peers to learn together. There's actually a consortium out there right now that those states that I listed would love North Dakota to participate in a consortium with them as a learning experience to learn about the ins, the outs, the goods, the bads, and the uglies. I would put that on the table for your consideration as a committee to think about that might be a very worthwhile consortium to participate in from a learning aspect. So
Interesting. Yeah, very interesting.
So-
Dale, do you make a note?
I'm having Ed make the note.
Okay.
I'll stay in touch with Senator Patton and everybody else. So yeah, but
Well,
there's a lot of opportunity to learn from our neighbors as they go through a lot of similar situations that we're going through as well. So
I think what Senator Patton was saying is if you want to get it done, make sure Ed's on the beat, okay?
I understand.
All right, thank you, Rich. Any more questions for Rich? Great. Okay, I think we probably better keep this meeting moving along here. I think next we've got David Glatt, Director of Department of Environmental Quality, going to talk to us about what he's learned from companies with high energy needs and what he envisions going forward. So, David, can you please go forward and see if we can continue to round out the information curve here?
I'll give it a shot here. Good morning, everybody. It just kind of real quick, what we've seen on the landscape from a regulatory end is that there's a lot of pressures on the existing energy generation fleet that we have in North Dakota, especially as it relates to anything that's fossil fuel. We're seeing a lot of regulations come out that look at how do we start constraining CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions from those facilities. Several of those regulations are pointed at single facilities, such as our coal fleet. And it really is making it tough for them to start to make business decisions on the long term. Because a lot of these regulations indicate that you put on, in the case of the greenhouse gas, that for the coal-fired fleet energy generation, that you would have carbon capture implemented by 2032. If you know anything about this, just the construction alone takes 4 years, not to mention the design, the permitting, getting the financing to do this, that's just not feasible. In addition, this is still a developing technology that I don't believe a company can guarantee a 90% capture rate, which is part of the rule, on a consistent basis. And so with all that going in, I believe, and what I've kind of get the sense is that our existing coal fleet has some very tough decisions in front of them unless the federal regulatory landscape changes. And so there's some hope for that. That being said, the companies will tell you that there's energy short, and to shut down any of the power plants, they don't foresee that, but they also understand the pressure coming from them. So what I did, I went and we've talked to these companies that are looking at major energy needs, and a lot of it is we need it now, and so they're looking at natural gas, those type of things, and building their own facilities. And the money doesn't seem to be that big of an issue. Natural gas facilities, I will tell you that the existing regulations or where they're going is that you can build a new facility, but you can only use 40% of it. So you have to over-design, overbuild 2.5 times to get the energy you need to run your facility, making it not very cost competitive. But they're looking at these type of things. One of the things that does come on is the discussion of nuclear. And where is that at? I did talk to my counterpart down in Wyoming, the regulatory agency down there, and got some insight on what they're doing on nuclear at the Kimmer facility. And he talked about, their process, what they went through. They're constructing now, looking at having that up and running by 2031. But they also, in part of that, they agreed to shut down the coal plant by 2025. And he said the problem is they have a small community that is for nuclear energy and this plant, but they will have no economic development driver other than the construction workers there for about 6 years. And that community may not be there at the end of that. And so they're trying to allow the power plant that uses coal to keep operating until 2031, and EPA has been reluctant to do that. So when I talked to him, I said, what did you learn? And he said, well, first and foremost, the government-to-government discussions were extremely helpful. The NRC, he said, was very easy to work with, was very upfront, provided a lot of good information to them. He liked that overall process. But he said it also it's not just federal to state, but it's state to local and federal to local. Was very important that that communication went forward, and including industry. He said the timelines are tough because it takes a long time to go through the design approval process and the construction. It's not a overnight sensation. It takes 10 plus years to get to that point. He also said that the power switch going from coal to nuclear is kind of for them, it's kind of a tough balancing act, because if you shut down the coal-fired power plant too soon, the economic incentive, the desire from the local community isn't there, because they basically dry up and go away while they're waiting for the nuclear plant to come online. And he said what really is a big issue for them is the waste handling. They have to agree to temporarily, permanently, if there's such a thing, store the waste on site. And they had to go through some legislative changes to make that happen. And he said that is, as far as industrial siting, allowing high-level nuclear waste to be stored in the state, those are all things that some of those have happened, but he says they're also talking about how do they move forward to gain more acceptance. Local support, he said, was really good. Outside the local community, not so good. He said there's folks outside that community that they don't see getting that economic impact. They see that this is not a good thing for Wyoming, and so they're getting pushback as far as, why are you doing this to the state? And so all of that kind of tells us that as we move forward, and I will say that we have talked to some of the big power utility companies, and I get the sense, and they haven't said this straight out, is that, yeah, nuclear, we're discussing it, but it's not on our front burner right now. There's just too many unknowns and questions. And they also know that with the load growth and the pressures to shut down some of the existing energy sources, that there are significant challenges moving forward for us. Things aren't going to get cheaper. Things aren't going to get more reliable. All that type of stuff that is going to be a concern for a state like North Dakota. So overall, what I have heard is that really start that government-to-government discussions, all the cards on the table, no smoke and mirrors. There is a reluctance by the local communities that they don't see a benefit from it, that if they're left out of the process, they can be a major issue to deal with, but just kind of negative. I think the presentations earlier today were helpful, is that it really is about that trust end of it. How do you get people to trust in this? North Dakota has some great potential. I think some of the limiting factors is where are we going to get the energy? I do think it's an all of the above. I think nuclear can be part of this if done right. But right now, the sense I get from talking to people is, yeah, we're kind of thinking it's a good thing, but what are we going to do with the waste? And I think that is one of the major issues that we'll have to deal with as a state. So that's pretty much, I think there's a lot of groundwork that has to be done at the state level, working with the federal and local entities to get this moving forward. And I like what Senator Patton and his work group is doing, looking at studying kind of how do we go forward with this and developing a nuclear strategy that will be open and available to the public, and being able to understand that and address their concerns moving forward. So that, in a nutshell, that's where I've been looking at things. And it's a very complex situation with a new administration.
Could be some openings. Could be some openings, correct?
Well, it's anybody's guess because I think that it won't be a straight line process.
But Dave, the couple of things that you said that are interesting or worthy of noting, and one is that Wyoming's getting it done, right? They got something done that everybody else is talking about. I think it certainly would make sense for our state to study what they did. The other thing that you made a comment on that just lacks common sense is, why would you shut down a coal-fired facility prior to the nuclear or whatever facility is going to be taking its place being brought online, and leaving all these people in a lurch between having a job and not? And so is that what I heard you say, is they're shutting down the coal prior to the new plant coming on?
Yeah, and I think what the original timeline was anticipating that the nuclear plant would be done sooner. And how
But
timelines go, that kind of was stretched out to 2031. And EPA came back and said, well, you agreed to 2025 to shut it down. And they're saying, well, look, our original timelines kind of meshed really well. These don't.
Yeah.
And now we're going to leave this local group in a lurch. And I do think the reason they're supporting the nuclear plant is that they saw the power plant shutting down. This was a viable way to keep the community viable.
yeah, even the
And-
best
and-
plans, even the best plans later are subject to change. So
Yeah.
hopefully cooler, smarter people will engage and come up with a solution that makes logical sense. So any other questions for Dave? Great. Okay, thank you, Dave. Appreciate that
Thank you.
update. I think the agenda item we have is, and Dave and Ed are both going to talk to us. We had the Midwest Radioactive Material Transportation Committee conduct a meeting here in Bismarck on October 8th, to which a number of us had the privilege of being there. Senator Patton, Representative John Nelson, and myself were there, as well as Ed and Dave. So those two gentlemen are going to take a few minutes to just tell us what they felt of the meeting and what came out of it. And so Ed and Dave, whoever wants to go first can go right ahead. Okay.
Yeah, I think I've just got a few things, and then Dave can come behind and correct me. But
Let's see, is Dave the guy that kind of got chastised, Ed?
that was because he didn't happen to be there at the time that I was introduced. But so we sat there through the mornings, very interesting talks. If there was room, I mean, we were just crunched in there. So my back couldn't take it any longer, but then we would have heard Miriam in the afternoon. And so I'm glad we were able to bring her in today. But the first speaker that I heard was Joe Lynch, and very interesting guy. He's worked on 8 different nuclear power plant decommissionings. And so he was talking about working on a decommissioning of the Kewanee plant in Wisconsin. But he pointed out that a number of nuclear power plants have been shutting down in recent years because they can't compete with natural gas unless they had a long-term purchasing agreement in place. But then at the end of his talk, he pointed out that nuclear power is going through a renaissance, and that several of these facilities are restarting. And just like Senator Patton mentioned, one of the ones he talked about was 3 Mile Island, that the Unit 2, which is the one that ran into trouble in '79, is closing down. Unit 1 was scheduled to close, but just recently, and I picked this up just literally within the last month or so, they're going to restart. They're planning to restart by 2028, and Microsoft is going to buy all the energy they can produce for the next 20 years after that, till 2048. And that's going to data centers primarily. And so again, that feeds into all the discussions today. One of the things I thought too was interesting is he talked about in the decommissioning of these power plants, they can end up with waste and I think he was thinking this was going to happen in 3 Mile Island Unit 1 above the Class C. And since there's nowhere that you can take that in the US greater than Class C waste, they have to store it on site, just like probably adjacent to the spent fuel rods. So again, then you've just got that much more material sitting at these facilities when they close. Pointing out nuclear power plants, $2 to $4 billion. That may be per unit. I'm not sure, but then it's 500 million to decommission. I don't know, Dave, do you got anything you want to add from what Joe Lynch said? Anything that I missed that's worth pointing out? Or
one thing I picked up on is, it takes a long time to decommission these facilities, and it's a step-by-step process. It's they do it by phases. Basically, as you be able to prepare to do your second phase, you need to complete the first phase in order to get equipment in certain areas to start decommissioning, buildings and things like that. So, and that was one of the things I picked up. And, there's a lot of waste that is generated as a part of this. I think that one plant does like over 20 million pounds of net waste, just from that one plant in Wisconsin. So there's a large amount.
yeah, and he talked about, basically just taking down buildings rather than taking the time to go in and taking out board by board if, something is higher than, and then I think basically when you take those buildings down, if you don't have anything above the Class C waste, then everything goes to Clive, Utah. And so that's got to be a huge facility to take that material. Then Will Livingston, who's a postdoctoral research associate out at University of Oklahoma, talked about, and as you could see from today, I mean, everything DOE after, what happened in North Dakota, what happened in South Dakota, I think to a lesser degree, maybe what happened in Texas back in 2016 or so. They've learned about this consent-based siting that you can't people can't find out, as Representative Nelson likes to point out, people's first indication of something can't be in the news, in the Bismarck Tribune, and for something in Pierce County. So that's what they're really leaning on. And so that's what he's done a lot of his work on, and they've had workshops and brought in different groups of people. They're looking for shared values. They look at what the community's long-term goals are and how they can fit in there. He said based on the workshops they've had, people want input on design. I'm not really sure if they mean exactly what a facility would look like a storage facility, and they also ultimately want veto power. Don't want it forced on them, which I think people can understand that. And interesting that he said people most willing to participate in these roundtable discussions on nuclear power tend to have a higher education degree, higher income, and be male. And that's when I pointed out in our panel discussion that what I saw from Rugby, Pierce County, in the hearing that was held up there is, I think probably 75% of the crowd was women, and they were, as I pointed out, had done their homework. He said people that are really negative, because that was one of the questions that came up, people are really negative, less likely to want to spend 90 minutes at a meeting twice a month. They kind of burned out, so you can only yell and scream so long, maybe. That's one of the things they found out. So, so again, that co-design, letting the communities have some input, whether it's a power plant or potentially a storage facility, whatever, is a big part of consent-based siting. So, Dave, again, anything with Will's discussion that
No, I think you covered it pretty good. Like I say, bringing the community into it. From they say it's co-design, so we've got community involved, and we got the subject matter experts. So having separate workshops initially, and then and progressively bringing the groups together. Looking for a community plus subject matter expert workshop, and some of the things that the challenges, like you mentioned, that they kind of went through, and getting people to participate was a challenge.
Okay. And then as Chairman Roars mentioned, Chairman Roars, Senator Pat, and Representative Nelson were to be on a panel, and somehow Dave Glott and I got pulled into that. But
So
I don't know. Did we actually fill an hour and 20 minutes? I wasn't watching the clock, but that's
it was crazy. We weren't supposed to be there more than 20, and we were there an hour and 20. So,
yeah.
but I need to apologize to Dave. I thought, Ed, you were going to get your final shots over Dave Glatzbow this morning, and I put the wrong Dave into this meeting with you. But now, Dave, thanks for jumping in. Okay, covering for me. But anyhow, any more comments, Ed, that you or Dave would have?
That's what I had, Dave, unless you've got something to add. Well, because you sat through the whole meeting, so and of course you saw Miriam's presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Was there anything else that? Well, originally we had. Well, I don't have it right in front of me. The gal, her schedule changed. We were also going to have. Where is she? Melissa Shazda was going to speak, and then she had a conflict come up in her, and so we weren't able to hear from her. But anything else, Dave, that from that meeting?
Like say, Miriam's presentation today included everything that was covered during the Transportation Committee meeting, and actually some additional information was brought forth today. So I found it quite interesting to hear it a second time.
Good.
From there we did move to the business section where, we had some reports from, Department of Energy offices and National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, the ad hoc working groups, the Tribal Radioactive Materials Transportation Committee, and then we do a regional roundtable to where each of the Midwestern states, the representatives, committee members, kind of go around the room and kind of go through what's been going on in their states. So the opportunity for me to talk about North Dakota, as far as what we talked about in the regional roundtable was we talked about the number of highway route controlled and non-highway route controlled shipments that were transported through North Dakota since the last meeting. A little discussion on, how that information is transmitted to the states, and that does go through our program. Being the governor's designee. And, we talked about, this possibility for inspections of these shipments as they come. A lot of them come from Canada. That's where a lot of these materials that are being manufactured that are going to other states for gamma knife, treatments, or down to facilities that are irradiating food or medical products, things like that. So we are notified, the Highway Patrol gets notified, and then they have the opportunity to do their inspections of these materials as they're coming into the state. So talked about that, and we talked about some of the other shipments of low-level radioactive waste coming out of the universities, oil and gas industry waste, some of those. Talked about just as the council here, as the regular meetings that the council has that we're having today, reiterate that, and talked a little about the House resolution as far as looking into nuclear energy. And then we get in just a little recap of the TNORM transportation to shipments and such, and a little talk about the TNORM waste disposal sites we currently have in North Dakota, where we have one permitted landfill, and we also have some permitted injection sites where the TNORM waste can be disposed of. So, and that was pretty much the highlight of it. We did end up with another talk on maritime shipments. It's quite interesting when you talk about the I believe it's the military has some micro reactors that are going to be coming on board, and these micro reactors and everything associated with it can be shipped in 4 20-foot Connex boxes and these intermodals. And it's interesting that, as they look to deploy these, outside of the US or, overseas, different places, they can ship them by air going out, but when they return them after they've been activated, and in use, now they have to transport them by ship. And there's just a few ships out there that have been constructed well enough to do these, and they're quite interesting. I could show you a picture if you want, but what they deal with a lot of different safety aspects. They have double hulls on them. They've got some extra sideboarding for collision resistance. Everything has got you got dual power, dual satellite communications. They got security on board. They've got their own fire detection systems. They're designed to where each of the cargo holds, individually they could be flooded and they can still be able to navigate the waters. In fact, they could all of the cargo holds could be filled with seawater and they could still continue to move. So it's quite interesting. You don't really think about it. Well, especially in North Dakota, where we wouldn't be directly submitted to that, but it's interesting the different things, the different designs, similar to what Miriam was talking about, the casks involved, whether things like that can be transported by these vessels as well. So that was the last piece that they talked about. So
that brings up the question, that are those designed so if the ships sink, that those containers can take pressure at the bottom of the ocean? Or
well, that's why they have the double hull design to, in fact, they've got that collision reinforcement, and to, I guess, the probability of that happening is very minimal due to the fact that, like I say, they can pretty much flood the whole vessel and it can continue to go because they've got twin engines, twin propellers, rudders, dual generators for power. They even have little bow thrusters. Talk about that ship that ran into the bridge. Well, this would be able to help them steer, in cases similar to what that ship ran into. And they've got anti-collision bulkheads. So they're really set up for about any scenario that you could think of, and I believe they also have security on board as well when you talk about pirating, things like that. So they do pick the transportation routes accordingly, and but they do have security on board as well, and maybe 24/7 emergency response and things like that. So yeah,
high level.
Yes, definitely. And I believe the UK has a couple of ships in service right now, and I believe they had a third one. But that would be the opportunity for the United States, would be to possibly contract through the UK if needed. So,
anything more, Ed, to add?
No, I mean, as you know, with their agenda, that pretty much wraps things up. I want to take the opportunity to say how much I appreciate all your work, Chairman Roars, and certainly going to miss you. I will correct you. You've been chairman for 5 years.
Okay.
I guess it felt like 6 or 7. But I think what you're thinking back to is your involvement with that bill that created, that went through on the Senate side, and I used to recall that off the top of my head. That's the bill, but all the work that you put in there, and then going right into the advisory council. So I certainly appreciate that, and going to miss you and going to miss Shannon. So
good. Thank you.
I'm sorry to see you both won't be returning to the legislature.
Well, different times, different places, right? So thank you all, the committee, for allowing me. I've enjoyed this a lot, and the committee and what we were charged to do, I think we've accomplished. I think it is really exciting to see that with Senator Patton's involvement, that I think this committee's got a challenge in front of it, and that is to try and figure out how can we capitalize on energy of all types. And of course, nuclear is a big part of that conversation. I really thank Dale for accepting the challenge. I visited with him, and part of the reason I think Dale accepted the challenge, Ed, is because I told him how you make these meetings so informative and easy for us to administer. And I know Dale has many subcommittees and many interim committees that he's on, and I know he's stretched thin as a retiree. He's stretched thin, and when I shared with him our relationship, he said, "You know what, Jim, I'll do it because primarily because of you and how easy you make it to be a chairperson." So thank you for your time. Thank the committee for their time. And I think the future is bright. I think Dale and I talked quite a bit about the future and where he can take this. And judging from a few of the things he said today, it sounds to me like he's the right man for this job today. So thank you, Dale. Good luck to you, and farewell to everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
All right.
Now we
great-
got to go after that 100-foot fossil tree. Now that
I was going to bring that up. Between you and I, we got to stay in touch because I'm going to get that tree retrieved for you one day.
Yeah.
And it's it's more than 100. It's like 150 or so. But my neighbor has it. He totally knows we're coming after him. So
Good.
someday when we get retired, we're going to do that.
Good. Sounds great.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.